Sir, move to 3B now. The order cracked across the first-class cabin as passengers fell silent, watching a flight attendant and a red-faced billionaire loom over Julian Vance, who hadn't done anything except sit in the seat printed on his ticket. Phones lifted. Whispers spread. Julian stayed still, calm, composed, absorbing the humiliation he'd seen too many times. What neither the crew nor the so-called VIP knew was that the quiet man they were pressuring wasn't just another passenger. He was the lawyer who owned the legal authority to ground their entire fleet, and in minutes he was going to use it. The ambient hum of the terminal at John F. Kennedy International Airport was a familiar symphony of chaos to Julian Vance. It was the sound of separation and reunion, of rushed vacations and high-stakes business. For Julian, it was just another Tuesday. He adjusted the strap of his supple, dark leather briefcase, a silent partner that had seen him through more boardrooms and depositions than he could count. He was flying transatlantic air flight 71 non-stop from New York to London Heathrow. His ticket, secured weeks in advance by his firm, was for seat 1A first class. Not a luxury in his mind, but a necessity. The 10-hour flight was his only window to review the final briefs for the London meeting. The meeting was worth 9 figures to his client. His presence was non-negotiable. Julian was a man defined by a quiet, unnerving precision. At 38, he was a senior partner at one of the most powerful asset management firms in the world, specializing in aviation law and finance. His firm didn't just advise airlines, they owned the planes. They were the lessors, the bank, the power behind the throne. Airlines like Transatlantic Air were their tenants, and Julian was the landlord flying to London to finalize a massive restructuring deal that would save Transatlantic from a hostile takeover. He dressed for comfort, not for show. A black-tailored cashmere hoodie, custom-made trousers, and sleek, understated sneakers that cost more than most people's first suit. He understood the optics. He was a black man in a space that was still in 2025 overwhelmingly white and old. He was used to the surprised looks that double takes the over-polite inquiries. He met them all with the same placid, patient smile. "Good evening, sir," he said, handing his passport and boarding pass to the gate agent. The agent glanced at the 1A on the ticket, then at Julian, then back at the ticket. The pause was almost imperceptible, but to Julian, it was a drumbeat. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Vance," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. He stepped onto the jet bridge and into the cabin of the enormous Airbus A350. He was greeted by a flight attendant with aggressively blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. Her name tag read, Brenda. "Welcome," she chirped, her eyes flicking to his boarding pass. "First class is this way." Her tone suggested he might be lost. "Thank you." "I'm in 1A, Julianne said, already moving past her. "Sir, I'll need to see your ticket," she said, her voice sharp, stopping him. Julian paused. He was the only person she had stopped. The white family of 4 behind him was waved through with a "Welcome aboard, folks." He turned slowly. "You just watched the gate agent scan it." "It's just procedure, sir," Brenda said, her smile tightening. Julian sighed, produced the pass and held it up. Her eyes scanned it. Searching for the anomaly she seemed convinced must exist. Finding none, she handed it back. "Enjoy your flight." Julian nodded, saying nothing, and made his way to the front row seat. He stowed his briefcase, settled into the wide plush pod, and pulled out his tablet. He had work to do. He declined the pre-departure champagne, asking only for sparkling water. He was deep into a dense contractual clause when the commotion started. Boarding was nearly complete when a man in a loud pinstriped suit, reeking of expensive cologne and entitlement, barreled into the first-class cabin. He was in his 50s with a fid face and a booming voice that was already complaining into his phone. "And I tell him, you don't make $1 billion by listening to idiots. You tell Donaldson if he can't get the votes, I'll buy his entire board out from under him." He barked before snapping his phone shut and glaring at Brenda, the flight attendant. "You must be Mr. Hollet." Brenda gushed, her entire demeanor transforming. She was no longer a security guard. She was a siccant. "Welcome aboard, sir. Such an honor to have you." Yeah. Where am I?" He grumbled, not looking at her. Brenda glanced at her manifest. "You're in 3B, Mr. Hollet." "Write this 3B. No, absolutely not." Hollet snapped his eyes, scanning the cabin. He pointed directly at Julian. "I want that seat." 1A. "I'm a transatlantic Sapphire Medallion member. I fly this route twice a month. I want that seat." Brenda's professional smile faltered. She looked at Julian, who hadn't even looked up from his tablet, and then back at the demanding red-faced man. "Sir," she said to Hollet, her voice a coo. "Seat 1A is already occupied, but 3B is a lovely window seat." "I don't care. I'm the VIP on this flight." "That's my seat," Hollet stated. "It wasn't a request. Go tell him to move." Brenda looked horrified, not at the request, but at the potential for confrontation. She plastered on her smile and walked the few steps to Julian's pod. Julian felt her presence before he saw her. He looked up. "Sir," Brenda began, her voice a strange whisper. "We have a very special passenger with us today, Mr. Hollet." "I heard," Julian said, his voice quiet. He specifically requested this seat. He's one of our most valuable customers." She continued, wringing her hands. "We were wondering if you would be so kind as to swap with him. We can offer you seat 3B. Julian looked at her. He looked at Hollet, who was staring at him with undisguised impatience. Then he looked back at Brenda. "No," he said simply. Brenda blinked. "I'm sorry. No, thank you." "I'm fine here," Julian said, and turned back to his tablet. A ripple of silence. Hollet's face purpled. "What did he say? Did you tell him who I am?" Brenda hurried back to Holloway, whispering frantically. Julian couldn't hear the words, but he could feel the temperature of the cabin changing. He knew this script. He knew it by heart. Brenda returned. Her smile was gone, replaced by a mask of stern corporate authority. "Sir," she said, her voice louder now, attracting the attention of the other first-class passengers. "This is a simple request. Mr. Hollet is a Sapphire Medallion member. We need to accommodate him." Brenda, Julian said, finally putting his tablet down. "I am a ticketed passenger in seat 1A. He is ticketed in 3B. If he has an issue with his seat, he can speak to the gate agent. I am not moving." "This is ridiculous," Hollet bellowed, stepping forward. "Look, son, I don't know who you think you are or how you even got in this cabin, but I am offering you a simple trade. Now take the other seat before I make this a problem." The how you got in this cabin hung in the air, thick and toxic. Julian looked up at the larger man. His calm was a fortress. "My name is Julian Vance. I'm a passenger just like you, and I'm not moving." "Sir, if you refuse to comply with a flight attendant's instructions," Brenda started. "What instruction?" Julian countered, his voice cutting through her. "You haven't given an instruction. You've made a request. I've declined. Are you now ordering me to give up my paid confirmed seat for another passenger because he's... what was it special?" Brenda was in over her head. She was a bully who had just met a spine. "He's our VIP, sir. We have a right to manage seating. You have a right to manage unassigned seating. This seat was assigned to me and I am in it. If you have a safety or security reason to move me, please state it. Otherwise, I'm going to finish my work." Holloway exploded. "This is an outrage. This person is being disruptive. I want him removed from the flight. He's being aggressive." Julian hadn't moved a muscle. He hadn't raised his voice. He simply sat. Brenda Hollet roared, "Get the captain now." Brenda, looking pale and furious, nodded sharply and disappeared toward the cockpit. Julian picked up his tablet. The other passengers were whispering some filming discreetly. He sighed, closed his eyes for a brief second, and opened the final asset lease agreement. This flight, it seemed, was no longer going to be a quiet one. The 10-minute wait for the captain felt like an hour. The first-class cabin was thick with a shared, unspoken tension. Preston Hollet stood fuming in the galley arms, crossed occasionally, glaring at Julian as if he were a piece of gum on his shoe. Brenda stood beside him, whispering and nodding, a co-conspirator in her own right. Julian, for his part, kept his eyes on his tablet. He read, and he read the same paragraph 3 times. His focus shattered. He wasn't just angry, he was exhausted. This was the tax he paid. The tax for existing in spaces where he was not expected. He could feel the stares of the other passengers, some sympathetic, most just awkwardly avoiding eye contact. Finally, a man in a crisp white pilot's uniform emerged from the cockpit, followed by a trembling Brenda. This was Captain Hayes. He had the look of a man who had been flying for 30 years and had zero patience for passenger squabbles. He was a man who wanted his flight to leave on time. Period. "All right, what's the issue here?" Captain Hayes said, his voice a low growl that commanded attention. Brenda immediately pointed at Julian. "Captain, this passenger in 1A is refusing to comply with a crew directive. He's being disruptive and aggressive." Holloway piled on. "Aggressive is right, Captain. I'm Preston Holloway. I'm on your board's most valued list. This gentleman is causing a disturbance." I politely asked for a seat swap, and he became belligerent. "Frankly, I don't feel safe with him on this flight." Julian's head snapped up. Belligerent. I don't feel safe. He finally unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. He was tall, leaner than Holloway, but he moved with an athlete's grace. He faced the captain directly, his voice remaining level professional. Captain Hayes Julian said, his tone the one he used in court, cold, clear, and absolute. "Let's be precise about what has happened. My name is Julian Vance. I am ticketed in seat 1A. This passenger," he motioned to Holloway, "boarded late and demanded my seat. Your flight attendant, Brenda, asked me to swap with him. I declined. She then insisted. I declined again. Mr. Holloway then accused me of not belonging in this cabin and became irate. He demanded I be removed. I have not raised my voice. I have not threatened anyone. I have simply refused to give up my seat." Captain Hayes rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at Holloway, whose fuming face clearly signaled high maintenance. Then he looked at Julian, who looked composed. Too composed, perhaps. Sir Hayes said to Julian, his voice heavy with impatience, "We're on a tight schedule. We've already got a 20-minute delay from the gate. I don't care who said what. Brenda is my lead attendant, and she needs to manage her cabin. Mr. Holloway is a priority passenger. It's just a seat. Why can't you just move to 3B and we can all get on our way?" It was the logic of the exhausted parent, the path of least resistance, and it was aimed squarely at Julian. Captain Julian said, his patience evaporating. "With respect, this is no longer about just a seat. It's about your crew member attempting to forcibly move a ticketed passenger to appease another based on what is priority status, the color of my skin." Brenda gasped. "How dare you? This has nothing to do with race. It has to do with your attitude." "My attitude?" Julian let out a short, bitter laugh. "My attitude was sitting quietly and working. His attitude was yelling and making demands. But I'm the problem." Holloway stepped forward. "See, Captain, he's getting agitated. I'm telling you, he's a security risk. Get him off the plane." Captain Hayes looked from Julian to Holloway. He had a choice. Back his crew and appease the VIP or defend the quiet man who was technically in the right. He made the wrong choice. "Mr. Vance," the captain said, his voice hardening into an order. "This is your final warning. You will take seat 3B or I will have you removed from my aircraft for non-compliance with a crew member's directive. We will not have this kind of disruption. Make your choice. You have 10 seconds. The cabin was dead silent. Every phone was now openly recording. Julian stared at the captain. He saw the man's decision. Expediency over justice. He saw Brenda's smug, triumphant smirk. He saw Holloway's leering grin. "You're ordering me to move from my assigned seat 1A to seat 3B under threat of removal?" Julian asked, his voice now dangerously soft. "Yes, that is my final order. Move or get off." Julian nodded slowly. He looked around the cabin at the faces staring at him. He held his head high. "Very well," Captain Julian said. He reached not for his bag, but for his phone. "You've made your position, and that of Transatlantic Air, perfectly clear. You have breached protocol, and you are about to make a catastrophic error." Holloway laughed. "Oh, what are you going to do, son? Call your lawyer?" You're holding up my flight." Julian looked directly at Hollet, a small cold smile touching his lips. "That won't be necessary." He turned back to the captain. "Captain Hayes, I must inform you that you are in violation of multiple FAA regulations regarding passenger rights. But more importantly, you are in direct breach of the covenant of quiet enjoyment clause in your airline's primary lease agreement for this specific aircraft." The captain's brow furrowed. What are you talking about? Lease agreement? Brenda scoffed. "He's just making things up. He's delusional." Julian ignored her. He unlocked his phone. "Captain, I am giving you one last chance to reconsider. Let me be clear. I am not a disruptive passenger. I am a senior partner at Aerolis International. We are the firm that owns this plane. Transatlantic Air is our client. My name is Julian Vance, and I am your lessor's chief counsel for the very restructuring deal that is keeping your airline from being sold for parts. A deal, I might add, that I am flying to London to finalise in 6 hours." The captain's face went from ruddy to sheet white. Brenda's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Holloway's smug grin faltered, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. You're who?" Captain Hayes stammered. "I am the man who signs off on the checks that allow your airline to use this $300 million piece of equipment." Julian set his voice like ice. "And you, Captain, have just threatened to remove your lessor's designated representative from his assigned seat on his way to save your company in order to appease him." Julian finally turned his full undivided attention to Preston Hollet. Preston Holloway, CEO of Hollet Capital Partners, the man whose hostile takeover bid I am flying to London to stop. "You're not a VIP, Mr. Hollet. You're the enemy. And you," he said, turning to Brenda, "just tried to give him my seat." The silence in the cabin was no longer tense. It was a vacuum. Captain Julian said, "You've chosen your side. Now allow me to choose mine." He held his phone to his ear. "I will need to make one phone call. I suggest you stay right where you are, and I strongly suggest you do not under any circumstances close that boarding door." Captain Hayes looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His operational certainty, the absolute authority he wielded on his aircraft, had evaporated. He was staring at a passenger who had just revealed himself to be, in essence, the banker, the landlord, and the executioner, all rolled into one. "Now wait a second, Mr. Vance." Hayes stammered, his voice losing all its command. "There's been a misunderstanding." "There has been no misunderstanding," Julian said, holding up a hand to silence him. His phone was ringing. "You gave a direct order. You threatened me with removal. You sided with a man who is actively trying to liquidate this airline and its assets. You put your entire company at risk to play a bully." Brenda was shaking, her face a mask of pale, dawning horror. She finally understood. She hadn't just insulted a passenger. She had insulted the man who held her company's fate in his hands, all to impress the very man trying to destroy it. Preston Hollet, for his part, had lost his bluster. His face was a thundercloud of calculation. He knew Julian's name. He knew Aerolis International. The pieces were slamming together in his mind, and the picture they formed was a disaster. "Hello, David," Julian said into his phone, his voice perfectly calm, as if he were ordering coffee. "My apologies for the late call. I'm on the tarmac at JFK Flight 771. He paused, listening. "No, I'm afraid I won't be making the 9:00 a.m. brief." "Yes, I'm on the aircraft. Airbus A350, serial number 9451, tail registration, N771. Say that's our asset." Captain Hayes flinched at the sound of his own plane's registration number. David Julian continued, "We have a critical problem. I have just been threatened with removal from this flight by the captain. No, not a security issue. It appears my seat 1A was required for another passenger, Mr. Preston Holloway." Another pause. Julian could hear his boss's sharp intake of breath. Yes, that Preston Holloway. The crew, Brenda the lead flight attendant, insisted I move, and when I declined, the captain ordered me to move or be forcibly deplaned. They cited me as aggressive and disruptive. Yes, David, I have it all on video, so do about 6 other passengers. Julian paced the small area of the galley, his back to the cockpit. David, this constitutes a material breach of our lease agreement. Section 9.4 interference with lessors' representatives. We place our people on these flights to monitor operations and conduct business expressly to avoid this kind of scenario. Transatlantic's crew has not only failed to provide a safe environment, they have actively created a hostile one. They have sided with a hostile actor against their own lessor. Captain Hayes stepped forward. Mr. Vance, please. This is a simple mistake. Let me handle this. Brenda, Mr. Holay, please take your assigned seats. Sir 1A is yours. I apologize. Let's just go. Julian turned and looked at the captain with a gaze so cold it could have frozen water. You think this is about a seat, Captain? You think an apology fixes this? You just proved to my firm that your crew is incompetent and your operational command is compromised. You've sided with the fox right in the henhouse. He turned back to his phone. David, the captain, is trying to de-escalate, but the threat has been made. The breach is established. I do not feel this crew can be trusted to operate this flight safely or professionally. Yes, I agree. The London meeting is secondary to asset protection. Julian's voice dropped. Yes, authorize it. Ground the asset immediately. I want a full stop on this flight. I want a new crew, and I want a full audit of this captain's and flight attendants' records. Yes, David, I'll inform them now. He hung up. The cabin was so quiet you could hear the faint whir of the ventilation. Julian Vance looked at Captain Hayes. Captain, he said, per my authority as Chief Counsel for AirAce International, the registered owner of this aircraft, I am formally informing you that you are in breach of your wet lease agreement. This aircraft, N1171TA, is now officially and immediately grounded. You can't do that. Brenda whispered, her eyes wide with panic. A passenger can't ground a plane. I am not a passenger, Julian stated, his voice ringing with authority. I am the lessor. This is my plane, and I am taking it back. This flight is cancelled. Now see here, Vance. Holay boomed, finding his voice again. This is insane. You can't cancel a flight. I have a meeting. This is tortious interference. Is it? Julian smiled. Your meeting in London, the one at 10 a.m., was to present your final hostile bid to the Transatlantic Board. A bid that is contingent on you being there in person. By cancelling this flight, I am merely protecting my firm's asset from a compromised crew. The fact that it makes it impossible for you to make your deadline. Well, that's just karma. Captain Hayes stumbled back toward the cockpit. I have to call operations. This is not possible. You do that, Julian said. They already have the email. It's from my CEO, David Chen. I suspect your dispatch is lighting up your console right about now. As if on cue, the ding of the cockpit's internal messaging system sounded, followed by a frantic high-pitched chime that signaled a priority alert from the airline's central command. Captain Hayes scrambled into the cockpit. Through the open door, the remaining passengers could hear a one-sided panicked conversation. Dispatch, this is Hayes, 771. Yes, I just got the alert. What do you mean grounded by less? Is it real? But he's right here. Yes, I understand. A full stop. Acknowledgement, full stop. Flight 771 is cancelled. Captain Hayes emerged. He looked like he had aged 20 years. He was no longer a captain. He was a man who had just scuttled his own ship. He picked up the cabin intercom, his hand shaking so badly he could barely press the button. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice cracked over the PA. This is your captain. Due to an unforeseen operational issue, Transatlantic Flight 771 is cancelled. We will be deplaning immediately. Please gather your belongings and exit the aircraft. A collective groan erupted from the entire plane from economy to first class. But in the front cabin, there was only stunned silence. Julian Vance calmly picked up his tablet and slid it into his briefcase. He looked at Brenda, who was openly weeping. He looked at Holay, whose face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. You, Holay seethed, jabbing a finger at Julian. You did this. You ruined me. No, Mr. Holay, Julian said, zipping his bag. You did this. You saw a man you didn't think belonged and you couldn't leave it alone. Your entitlement did this. Brenda, he said, his voice softening just a fraction. You did this. You chose to humiliate a passenger to impress a bully. And Captain, he said to the shell-shocked pilot, you did this. You abandoned your authority and your integrity to avoid a 20-minute delay. Now, if you'll excuse me, Julian said, stepping into the aisle. I'll be the first one off. I have to call my travel agent. I need to book a different flight to London on a different airline. The announcement of a flight cancellation on a fully boarded plane is the social equivalent of pulling a fire alarm in a crowded theatre. The immediate reaction is disbelief, followed by confusion, and then a rapid, simmering rage. The groans from the back of the in-plane rippled forward, turning into shouts. Cancelled. What do you mean, cancelled? We've been sitting here for an hour. But in the first-class cabin, the drama was of a different, more personal quality. It was a tableau of total humiliation. As Julian Vance made his way to the now-open boarding door, Preston Holay lunged for him. You can't just walk away. I'll have your job. I'll have your bar license. I'll sue you, your firm, and this entire godforsaken airline. Julian didn't even flinch. He stopped and turned his hand on the doorframe. Sue us for what, Mr. Holay? For protecting our asset, for grounding a plane operated by a compromised crew. I have video evidence, multiple witnesses, and a direct confession from the captain that he threatened to remove me in violation of FAA policy. Your lawsuit wouldn't survive the first motion to dismiss. He leaned in his voice, dropping so only Holloway could hear. Your bid for transatlantic was contingent on securing new financing, which in turn was contingent on proving you could slash operational costs. My firm, Aerolease, holds the note on over 60% of their fleet. My recommendation determines their financing for the next decade. By threatening me, you gave me all the evidence I needed to declare Transatlantic's leadership, represented by Captain Hayes, as a high-risk partner. Your hostile takeover didn't just fail to get off the ground. Preston, it's buried. Hollay's face, which had been bright purple, drained of all colour. He understood. This wasn't just about a missed meeting. This was a strategic kill. Julian hadn't just won the battle. He had ended the war before it even began using Hollay's own arrogance as the weapon. Julian then turned his gaze to Brenda. She was huddled near the galley, crying into her hands. Ms. Scott, he said, his voice devoid of malice, just heavy with fact. You saw me as a problem. The real problem was the man you were trying to impress. You just tried to give the wolf the keys to the farm. I hope for your sake you learn from this. He nodded to the other shell-shocked first-class passengers. My apologies for the inconvenience, folks, but I assure you, this aircraft was not safe to fly. With that, he stepped off the plane. The walk back up the jet bridge was surreal. He was walking against a tide of gate agents and airline management who were rushing onto the plane, their faces panicked, all speaking into walkie-talkies. As he entered the terminal, the gate area was already descending into chaos. The monitor above the gate, which had red on time, flickered and then turned a stark, brutal red. Cancelled. A wave of anger erupted from the waiting area. Julian Vance, however, walked straight past the chaos. He didn't go to the customer service desk. He didn't wait in the line of 200 angry people. He walked to the transatlantic first-class lounge. He entered the quiet plush sanctuary and was greeted by a lounge agent. Sir, Flight 771, we just heard it's cancelled. I'm so sorry. There must be a systems. It's all right, Julian said, handing the agent his original ticket. My name is Julian Vance. I'm with Aerolease International. I need you to book me on the next available flight to London Heathrow. On any airline except this one, British Airways American Virgin, I don't care. First class, my firm will cover it. The agent, seeing the name, the black tier credentials, and the steel in Julian's eyes, went into overdrive. Yes, Mr. Vance, right away. There's a BA flight leaving from Terminal 7 in 90 minutes. Let me secure you a seat. As Julian sat in a quiet corner, sipping the sparkling water he'd wanted an hour ago, he watched the fallout from a distance. Through the lounge windows, he could see Flight 771 dark and silent at the gate, a $300 million tomb. Back on the plane, the deplaning was an exercise in misery. Captain Hayes and Brenda had to stand by the door absorbing the verbal abuse of every single passenger. "This is a disgrace. I'm going to miss my connection. You've ruined my vacation." The last passenger to the plane was Preston Holloway. He walked not like a man, but like a defeated bull. He was breathing heavily, his expensive suit rumpled. He stopped in front of Captain Hayes. "Do you know?" Holloway whispered, his voice shaking with a terrifying suppressed rage. "What you've done? Do you have any idea what you cost me today?" "Mr. Holloway, billions," Holloway hissed. "Not millions. Billions with a B. You incompetent tin pot pilot. You and your waitress?" He spat, glaring at Brenda. "You just lost me the deal of the decade because you couldn't handle one single passenger." He didn't yell. The whisper was far more frightening. He straightened his tie. "When I'm done with you, you will not be able to get a job flying a cargo plane in Alaska. And you," he said to Brenda, "will be lucky to serve pretzels at a bus station. I will personally see to it." He turned and stormed off the jet bridge. Captain Hayes leaned against the bulkhead, his career in ashes. Brenda finally collapsed onto a jump seat, her sobs echoing in the empty, silent cabin. The operational issue had been identified, and it was them. The cancellation of a major international flight like Transatlantic 771 is not a pebble in a pond. It's a boulder. The ripple effect is immediate and catastrophic. At the gate, chaos reigned. The 200 passengers from 771 were now a furious mob at the customer service desk demanding rebooking. The airline, already reeling from the sudden grounding of a prime asset, had no immediate answers. The next flight to London with available seats wasn't for another 24 hours. The cost of hotel vouchers, meal stipends and compensation would run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the real damage was happening in rooms Julian and Holloway had just left. In the Transatlantic Air Operations Center, a code red alert was flashing. Lesser-initiated grounding. It was an event so rare, so catastrophic, that most of the dispatchers had only seen it in simulations. It was the aviation equivalent of a nuclear meltdown. The CEO of Transatlantic Air, a man named Robert Fields, was pulled out of a dinner when his COO explained what had happened. That Captain Hayes had threatened to remove Aerolis's chief counsel from their own plane to appease Preston Holloway. Fields was silent for a full 10 seconds. "Get me Hayes," Fields finally said, his voice dangerously calm. "Get me that flight attendant. Get me airport security. I want them both escorted to an office, and I want their badges and wings taken now. And get David Chen at a release on my line. I don't care what time it is." Fields knew he wasn't just managing a PR crisis. He was trying to save his airline. Holloway's takeover bid was public knowledge for his own crew to be seen as actively helping Holloway while alienating their primary Leor. It was a complete and total disaster. Meanwhile, at a competing airlines lounge, Julian Vance was boarding his new flight. He had been personally escorted to the front of the security line by the lounge manager. As he settled into his new first-class pod on a rival airline, his phone buzzed. It was Robert Fields, the CEO of Transatlantic. Julian let it go to voicemail. He sent a text to his boss, David. "On BA 1-12 landing LHR 7:15 a.m. The meeting is still on. I'll have the full incident report typed up by the time we land. Asset TA 380 is secure at JFK." David replied almost instantly. "Good. Fields has called me 3 times. He's apoplectic. He's already fired the captain and the attendant. You did the right thing. This gives us 100% of the leverage for the London negotiation. Holloway is officially a non-issue. He's missed his presentation window." Julian put his phone on airplane mode. As his new flight pushed back from the gate, he looked out the window and saw in the distance the dark, inert shape of Transatlantic 771. He had shut it down. He felt no triumph, only a profound, bone-deep weariness. He had been forced to use a nuclear weapon to solve a problem that should have been solved with a simple, "I'm sorry, Mr. Holloway, that seat is taken." He closed his eyes, and for the first time that day, The exhaustion hit him. He was asleep before the plane even reached cruising altitude. Julian landed at Heathrow at 7:10 a.m. local time. A car was waiting. He showered and changed at the airport lounge, swapping his casual flight attire for one of his finest Savro suits. When he walked into his firm's London office at 8:45 a.m., he was the picture of an immaculate, unflappable corporate lawyer. The transatlantic air representatives were already there, including CEO Robert Fields. They looked haggarded, as if they hadn't slept. They had flown in the day before. Julian Fields said, rushing forward, his hand extended. "On behalf of my entire airline, I cannot find the words to express my apology. What you experienced it was a disgrace. It is not who we are." Julian looked at the man's hand and then met his eyes. He shook it firmly. "Robert, thank you for that. But let's be clear about what happened. What I experienced was a symptom of a deeper problem. Your crew felt empowered to discriminate. Your captain chose to appease a bully rather than follow federal law. That is who you were yesterday." The transatlantic team flinched. "Now," Julian said, taking his seat at the head of the long mahogany table. "This incident has clarified things. My firm is now reconsidering the terms of your lease extensions. The Holloway problem," he said, "has been neutralized. He missed his deadline. His bid is void. You're welcome." Fields nodded, grim-faced. "We owe you more than we can say." "Yes, you do," Julian said, opening his briefcase. "So let's talk about what that debt looks like. We're not just restructuring your financing, we're restructuring your company. My firm now requires a permanent seat on your board of directors. And we are mandating a top-to-bottom, externally audited review of all your diversity, equity, and inclusion training protocols, starting with your flight crews." It was a power play, plain and simple. He had been given the leverage, and he was using it not just to punish, but to fix. The crew of Flight 771, Fields said quickly, has been terminated. Both Captain Hayes and Flight Attendant Scott. Their careers with Transatlantic are over, effective immediately. Julian nodded. "A necessary but insufficient step. Let's talk about the future, shall we? I have a new term sheet here. I suggest you read it very, very carefully." For the next 3 hours, Julian Vance dismantled and rebuilt Transatlantic Air's operational covenants. He secured his firm's investment, protected their asset, and in the process forced a systemic change on an airline that desperately needed it. He won. Weeks turned into a month. The story of Flight 771 became an internal legend, a cautionary tale whispered in cockpits and galleys. The financial news outlets reported only that Preston Holloway's audacious hostile takeover bid for Transatlantic Air had unexpectedly collapsed, citing a missed financing deadline. His company's stock dipped 15% overnight. He never recovered. The momentum was lost. His reputation as an infallible raider was shattered. The karma for Preston Holloway wasn't a single event. It was a slow, crushing gravity. He had built his empire on brute force and intimidation. But he'd been brought down by a man he hadn't even registered as human. He had lost a multi-billion-dollar deal because he was too arrogant to sit in seat 3B. For Brenda Scott, the karma was swift and absolute. Fired for cause with a do not rehire flag on her record, she was blacklisted. No major airline would touch her. Her incident, which included racial discrimination and contributing to the grounding of an aircraft, made her uninsurable. The last anyone heard, she was working at a duty-free kiosk at a regional airport in Florida. For Captain Hayes, the fall was even harder. The FAA opened an investigation into his conduct. His threat to remove Julian a passenger in his assigned seat without a valid security reason was a clear violation. They suspended his ATP license pending a full psychiatric and procedural review. He was a man in his late 50s. His career was over. He had lost his command, his pension, and his identity, all because he took the path of least resistance. And for Julian Vance, he was at home in his New York apartment 3 weeks later when a large, heavy box arrived. It was from Robert Fields, the CEO of Transatlantic. Inside was no wine, no gift basket. It was a meticulously crafted die-cast metal model of an Airbus A350 painted in the transatlantic livery. The tail number was NF71TA. With it was a simple handwritten note. "Mr. Vance, this is to remind us of what's at stake. You saved our company even as you had every right to destroy it. Thank you for showing us the cost of failure. RFPS, your new board member packet is enclosed. We'll see you at the next meeting." Julian placed the model on his bookshelf. It wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder that sometimes the only way to win a fight is to be willing to shut the whole thing down. He had been asked to move. He had refused. And in the end, he had moved an entire airline. 6 months had passed. The chill of that October evening on the tarmac at JFK had given way to the thaw of a New York spring. But in the 40th floor boardroom of Transatlantic Air's headquarters, the air was still heavy with the memory of that day. Julian Vance adjusted the cuff of his shirt and looked down the long, polished mahogany table. He was no longer a passenger, a lawyer, or even a lesser representative. He was Director Vance, the newest and youngest member of the Transatlantic Air Board of Directors, a non-negotiable term of the new lease agreement he himself had drafted. The model of N771TA sat on his desk back in his own office, a silent testament. But here, his presence was the reminder. The other board members, a collection of gay-haired industrialists, bankers, and airline veterans, treated him with a potent cocktail of respect and thinly veiled fear. He was the man who had, with a single phone call, done what no regulator or competitor ever could. He had stopped the heart of the airline, if only for a day to save its life. If we can turn to Agenda Item 4, Robert Fields, the CEO said, his voice strained. The Vance mandate. "Director Vance, the floor is yours." Julian nodded, and the room quieted. He didn't stand. He didn't raise his voice. He simply spoke. His courtroom-trained baritone filling the space. "Thank you, Robert, gentlemen," he said, nodding to the board. 6 months ago, this company was exposed not by Mr. Hollet's hostile bid, but by its own internal culture. A culture that permitted a senior captain and a lead flight attendant to believe that humiliating a ticketed passenger was a smaller risk than displeasing a bully. He paused, letting the words land. "The Vance mandate, as you call it, is not a punishment. It is a vaccine. The preliminary audit we commissioned has concluded, and the findings are, to be blunt, appalling. Over 60% of crew members reported feeling unsupported by management in passenger confrontations, and over 40% of non-white flight staff reported passenger-driven racial bias that was ignored by their superiors. This is the rot that Captain Hayes and Ms. Scott grew from." He tapped his tablet and the main screen lit up with graphs and data. "Today, the board will vote to ratify the new crew resource and intervention protocol. This protocol explicitly empowers and requires flight attendants to de-escalate passenger-on-passenger conflict, and it provides a direct anonymous channel to report priority passengers who abuse their status. Furthermore, we are implementing a new scenario-based training module mandatory for all pilots and lead attendants, developed by a third-party ethics firm." He looked directly at Fields. "This company's greatest asset is not its planes. It's the public's trust that they will be transported safely. And safety is not just mechanical, it is human. We will no longer allow entitlement to be a security threat at $30,000 FT. The vote, Mr. Chairman." "All in favour," Fields said. Every hand at the table went up. It was unanimous. The quiet systemic change was locked in. The bully had been beaten not just for a day, but for the lifetime of the company. While Julian was rebuilding an airline culture, the 3 individuals who had sparked the fire were learning to live in the craters they had created. Preston Hollet was, for the first time in his life, flying commercial in a middle seat. He was a Chicago O'Hare connecting to a smaller regional jet, trying to salvage a minor deal in a flyover state, the only kind of deal he could get now. His name was Toxic. The Hollet's Folly. Incident, as the financial press had dubbed it, had painted him as erratic a man whose personal ego could vaporize billions. His partners had fled, his credit lines had been frozen, and Hollet Capital Partners was a ghost its offices sublet. "Sir, you'll have to check that bag." A gate agent said, her voice flat, not looking up from her screen. "This is a standard carry-on." Hollet boomed his face, turning that familiar shade of purple. I fly constantly." "This fits, sir. We're in boarding group 5. The overheads are full. Your options are to check it here or not fly." "Your choice," she said, her lack of deference infuriating him. He was just another passenger, another problem. Seething, he slammed the bag on the counter for her to tag. As he did, he looked out the window. A massive, gleaming transatlantic A350, identical to Flight 771, was just pushing back from the gate next to his. It was a symbol of the empire he had lost, taxiing away without him. He was grounded in every way that mattered. 2,200 mi away, in the humid bustle of Miami International, Brenda Scott was wiping down a glass counter. Her name tag pinned to a cheap polyester vest simply read, Brenda. She was selling overpriced bottles of rum at a Caribbean gold duty-free kiosk. A group of laughing uniformed flight attendants, young, confident, and full of life, walked past her stall, pulling their own carry-ons. One of them, a young black woman with her hair in neat braids, was telling a story, and the others, including her white captain, were listening, intently laughing with her. They were a team. Brenda felt a sharp, bitter sting of envy. She had been one of them. She had held that authority, that small measure of power. She had thrown it all away for a man who didn't even know her name, and in the process had tried to extinguish the very spark of confidence she now saw in the young attendant who passed her by without a glance. A customer tossed a handful of change on her counter. Pack of Malba. Brenda just nodded and began to count. And Captain Hayes, his appeal to the FAA had been that same week. It was held in a sterile, windowless room in Washington, D.C. He had sat in his old, ill-fitting uniform and listened as an FAA administrator read the final judgment. While we acknowledge Captain Hayes' 30 years of service, the administrator read his decision to invoke security protocol to settle a passenger seating dispute demonstrates a fundamental and catastrophic failure of command. The threat of removal was used not as a tool of safety, but of convenience. It is the finding of this board that Mr. Hayes' operational judgment is permanently compromised. The revocation of his air transport pilot license is final. He was a captain with no plane, a man with no authority. He had given his final failed order. That evening, Julian Vance boarded transatlantic flight 772. Returning to New York, he walked down the jet bridge, his briefcase in hand. He stepped into the first-class cabin. The lead flight attendant, a sharper-looking young woman in her 40s with kind eyes, looked at her manifest and then at him. "Good evening, Director Vance," she said, her smile genuine and professional. "Welcome aboard. You're in 1A. Can I get you some sparkling water and lime before we take off?" "That would be perfect. Thank you, Maria," he said, reading her name tag. "My pleasure, sir. We're happy to have you." He settled into the seat, his seat. It was just a pod of leather and plastic, but it was a symbol. He looked out the window as the plane, another A350, pushed back from the gate. There was no drama, no tension, just the quiet professional hum of a well-run machine, a machine he had helped to fix. The plane accelerated down the runway, its engines roaring and lifted effortlessly into the night sky. Julian opened his tablet, the light illuminating his face. The London meeting had been a success. The new training modules were already paying dividends. He had work to do. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a flight. It was a story about assumptions. A flight attendant assumed the man in the suit was more important than the man in the hoodie. A captain assumed the path of least resistance was the path of safety. And a bully assumed his power was absolute. They were all wrong. They thought Julian Vance was just a black man in their way. They didn't know he was the way. He was the man who held the keys. The hard karma here isn't loud or explosive. It's quiet, it's corporate, and it is permanent. Brenda and Captain Hayes didn't just lose their jobs, they lost their careers. Preston Holey didn't just miss a meeting, He lost $1 billion empire, all because they couldn't stand to see a man in a seat they thought wasn't his. What do you think, was Julian's response too extreme, or was it the only language they would understand? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story and want more tales of dramatic justice and karma, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that bell so you never miss a